The Prime Minister is seeking a new UK-EU defence and security pact and deals on food and agricultural goods, energy, touring artists and professional qualifications. George, with warnings of the risk of trade wars ringing in our ears, is this something we should be welcoming?
I think so. I think there's a strong case for having better relations with Europe. I mean, everyone across the political spectrum agrees that the Brexit deal that the UK signed is not a good deal. So there's clearly room for improvement. And then politically, if you look at the polling, only about 30% of voters now think that Brexit was the right decision. Only 11% think it's been a success.
That's damning, isn't it?
It is. And I mean, the really striking thing is that
Leave voters.
The Leave, yes, you've seen a swing among Leave voters, and the top Leavers, Nigel Farage, Kemi Badenoch, are now sort of agreeing it hasn't gone well, but don't blame us, blame the other guys.
Rachel, is it really a reset? I know we've talked about this several times on the podcast, or are they just doing the bare minimum with, as George says, our closest neighbours?
I think it's bare minimum, at least at this stage. So, like, nothing concrete was agreed. It was significant that Starmer was the first UK Prime Minister to go over and be invited to an EU summit since Brexit. We're going to get more detail on what they might agree later on, a couple of months, and there's a big meeting probably in May where we might get something more, some more detail. But the topics under discussion are very much like the low-hanging fruit. So things like a visa scheme for touring musicians. There's this idea of that the EU is very sort of pro a visa-free travel scheme for under 30, sort of students and young people. And even that idea of like, yeah, we could have some young people like come over, like they have in Australia, and work here for a bit and then go back to Europe, and like the hospitality industry would love that. But even that, like the Labour government is very much like, no, we're not sure about this. So
because it's sort of what branded as freedom of movement Mark II, I guess.
Yeah, and because like immigration is such an important topic, such a powerful topic in politics at the moment, the idea of doing anything that could be read as increasing immigration, even if it's the kind of immigration that British voters either like or don't necessarily think of as immigration, they think of it as people coming here and working for a few years and going back, like they're not keen on that at all. So it really is kind of the beginnings of maybe thinking about possibly having a conversation about a reset rather than a reset itself.
George, it's rumoured, isn't it, that officials have reportedly lowered their expectations following the meeting. And it's really hard to picture what a reset might look like given these red lines that Labour have put in place, isn't it? I mean, we touched on it there, freedom of movement, but no return to the single market, no return to the customs union. I mean, where does Starmer sit with this himself? Do we have a hint of what he actually believes?
The big thing the UK wants is a defence and security pact. Now, that's partly a reflection of a more unstable geopolitical environment, partly America wanting Europe to pull its weight more on defence. And then,
so it's not a sign that they think NATO's wobbly.
No. I think it's it's an as well as rather than an either or, though depending on where Donald Trump becomes, it's not bad to be exploring alternatives. And then it's deals on things like critical rare earth materials and so on. Yeah. So a lot of it is quite technical and wonkish. They want agreements on agricultural goods as well, energy and emissions trading, touring artists. I mean, I think that's one that the music industry will certainly welcome, and that's been one of the real costs of Brexit, how that's hit bands who are touring. Some.
What actually happens? What's been the penalty?
It's just the amount of bureaucracy involved.
Right.
There are now some US touring artists who, when they're playing in Europe, will simply skip Britain because you can't travel around the single market in the same way. And obviously, it also creates huge obstacles and bureaucracy for UK artists who are looking to tour in Europe. So I think actually that is welcome. But we're in the odd position where the EU is demanding things as well. The youth mobility deal that Rachel mentioned, and they also want greater access to British fishing stocks, which is indeed a sort of classic Brussels demand. So look, I think the political risk is that it goes too far for the really hard levers, because the Brexiteer press will call it, they're already calling it a sort of betrayal, but it's too soft for Remainers
So you end up pleasing no one.
So you end up pleasing no one, which is a challenge that this government has often faced. And Labour have got reform breathing down their neck. They're increasingly worried about sort of ferocious insurgency. They've also got the Lib Dems and the Greens. And if you look at the detail of these recent, the recent YouGov poll, which had Labour behind reform, 11% of people who voted Labour in 2024 have gone to the Lib Dems. That's actually the party they're losing the most votes to. So, but this is also why I think they recognise they do need to do something on Europe for political reasons, but they're sort of too nervous about reform and Brexit to really make a big song and dance of it. But we're going to have this EU summit in May in the UK. Expectations are low, so perhaps people will be surprised on the upside. It's certainly true. There are lots of deals you can do that don't equate to rejoining the single market or the customs union. They are talking about this other customs area around the Mediterranean, so we'll see.
I mean, David Gort wrote for the New Statesman a couple of weeks ago how Brexit could be, and certainly is returning as an issue. Do you agree with that?
I think Brexit is an issue that is sort of lurking underneath a lot of the issues that are kind of headline political topics. Productivity is one. The issues faced by certain sectors, hospitality, agriculture, is one. It's kind of immigration, obviously. Like it's there kind of underneath everything, but it is really not currently, I think, in the interest of either Labour or the Conservatives to kind of talk too much about it. And we've also got to remember that whether you thought that leaving the EU was the right decision or not, Britain wasted nearly a decade of sort of time and political energy focusing on that issue, and we've seen the results of that in that all kinds of other parts of the state started falling apart. So even if you think yes, if we clicked our fingers and could fix all this, it would be beneficial in all of these areas.
I mean, we're not going back in, are we?
We're not going back in, and there are sound political reasons for not wasting any more or too much time and energy on it. Just to sort of to put into sort of context how long we've been talking about this month, February, is 9 years since David Cameron went off to Brussels to kind of do his renegotiation and get his concessions. And obviously when he went and had those conversations, he was hoping that he would settle the Europe question for a generation. And look at what's happened in the last 9 years.
5 years since we left, which seems absolutely extraordinary. But just before we move on to trade, I mean, George mentioned Kemi Badenoch.
The Conservatives are in a mess about this.
Well, have they seem to have accepted that Brexit hasn't been successful. That's not to say that it's that leaving was a mistake, but what's going on there?
They're kind of trying to play it both ways. I think they understand, looking at the polls, even Leavers think it hasn't been successful. So, okay, Brexit was the right decision, but we haven't made the most of it. The problem for the Conservatives is then you ask the question, the very reasonable question, well, who was in charge when that was happening? And Kemi Badenoch can kind of say that, it wasn't her because she wasn't in the bit of government that was doing that. However, her shadow foreign secretary is Priti Patel, who is sitting right there and giving interviews saying that, for example, on immigration, she thinks the points-based system that she and Boris Johnson thought up post-Brexit, the one that sort of led to the spike, what some Conservatives are calling the Boris wave of immigration in 2021-22, she's saying that, that was a huge success. And that is very much not the message that Kemi Badenoch wants to put out. Her message is we should accept and apologise for the mistakes that, other people, i.e. not me, Kemi Badenoch, made. And that kind of really disrupt her message. She came out at the start of this week with 5 tests for any negotiation, which people might... Kemi did.
Yeah.
Sort of very Gordon Brown circa 1997, the Euro, 5 tests to judge Keir Starmer's reset with the EU. And they included a whole load of things like, absolutely no more immigration or any deal on asylum, no more money paid to the EU, no jurisdiction whatsoever for European courts or the any kind of European laws whatsoever. And it's very much not 5 tests to make a reset work. It's 5 tests to make sure that whatever Keir Starmer announces, Kemi Badenoch can go, ha, betrayal. But I don't think anyone's really listening to her about this at the moment. They're listening to Nigel Farage.
There you go. George, I mean, the EU officials have suggested at least that Labour will have to choose at some point between the US and the EU in any potential, sadly, we think there will be one, a trade war. Is there any way in your mind that you can see Labour being able to please both?
No. No. I think, and the risk is obviously that you upset both at once. There's also the China reset in the mix. So Labour, the UK finds itself in this awkward position of sort of circling amongst these three big sort of geopolitical powers, and really British foreign policies in a mess. The old line used to be that Britain had lost an empire, not yet found a role. The closest it had to a role was in the New Labour era, trying to act as this sort of bridge between the US and Europe. But if Donald Trump sort of intends on dismantling bridges, the risk is you're cast adrift. Now, I think the reason Number 10 are keeping their options open is they genuinely think there are opportunities for the UK as well as risks from a Trump presidency. To some extent, that's been vindicated by Trump being much warmer in his rhetoric towards Keir Starmer initially than some expected, despite the noises up in Trump world against Labour, against Peter Mandelson, and so on. And as you can see, he's still proceeding with this EU reset. If Trump imposes, when he imposes tariffs on the EU, I think you will just see the UK simply ignore it in a sense and just say we want the best trading relationship possible with the US. I mean, some are unhappy that Starmer hasn't been more condemnatory in the treatment of Canada, for instance. An old British ally, but they are playing a very careful diplomatic game. I don't think they hope for a sort of traditional old-fashioned deal with the US on goods. They want to explore deals on technology, and they hope for more traditional trade deals with Europe on goods. So that's how they're hoping it plays out. But it's a very treacherous position to be in.
But that was an unambiguous no. They can't please both. So the question has got to be which way will they hedge?
I think ultimately it's closer to the US.
I think it's neither. I think just as George said right at the start, they're going to try to please both and end up not really pleasing anyone.